So yeah, Dhruv, can you? All right. Yeah. So that's our machine learning team from Quad's RR campus and EC campus. Yeah. So this will be the agenda for today, right? We'll have a very basic introduction to what machine learning is initially, and get into of some fundamentals of logistic regression, activation functions, and convolutional neural networks, which will be the model we'll be working on and trying to understand from the ground up. Followed, post the introduction and the explanation, we'll have a hands-on session on convolutional neural networks. Okay, so what is machine learning? We know for the past few thousand years, humans have been able to learn from their previous experiences. And recently, we have been able to transmit that information that we have into machines, and the machine does work for us. But what happens when we combine the ability for machines to learn through their previous experiences? That is exactly what machine learning is. So to discuss on a much broader spectrum, machine learning can be divided into three parts. One is the supervised learning, the unsupervised learning, and the other is the reinforcement learning model. The supervised learning is something that's based on labels. So suppose you have a huge data set containing cats and dogs, and we need to be able to distinguish between cats and dogs looking at an image of the same. We take the data set that has labels of cats and dogs. The data sets are basically multiple examples of the data points that we need, and using a certain mathematical algorithm, we will train the machine to learn based off the labels that's present in the data set. So that is supervised learning. Unsupervised learning is something that works without labels. So suppose we have a huge data set of cricketers with their batting scores and their bowling and their wickets taken. So when you plot the data, you can observe that there are certain cricketers who have large number of wickets taken, but very small number of runs scored. And on the other end, we have cricketers who have large number of runs, but very little cricket and very little wickets taken. So looking at that, you can see a different cluster of data, and the machine in a way will be able to segregate these two clusters, and the human can interpret the same clusters as, let's say, batsmen and bowlers. So that is exactly what unsupervised learning does. The third model, which is called the reinforcement model, where the machine works on a reward and punishment sort of strategy. So suppose you want to build an autonomous path detecting algorithm for a driverless car, for instance, and the machine, let's say, classifies the traffic signal in the right way. So in a way, you're rewarding the machine. That is, you're giving what the model is actually searching for. And let's say it classifies a pedestrian crossing the zebra crossing as not an obstacle. And you don't want to hit the person. So in a way, you're just punishing the machine learning model. So that is what reinforcement learning is. Right. So as we know, machine learning is there in pretty much every single thing, ranging from image and speech recognition to recommendation engines like your Spotify, Netflix, driverless cars. It has a massive, a lot of people are investing in machine learning, especially in the medical field as well as the astronomical fields, real estates, so on and so forth. All right. So instead of just understanding what machine learning is or having a theory session, we would like to go in deeper into that and try and explore what neural networks are. So neural networks, in a way, started basically to imitate the human neural networks or human neurons, and they basically have three fundamental layers. The first is the input layer, and the second is a hidden layer, which can have multiple different layers, but we'll stick to one hidden layer, followed by the output layer. So these multiple layers are connected by synapses, which can contain some sort of weight, which performs a particular, let's say, operation on your input values to try and make them more computable for the machine. And these synapses send the information to the hidden data, which acts as the heart of a machine learning model where every single decision is made. And this is then sent into an output layer, and the output layer is what gives you your necessary output, which can either be a classification or something of the sort. Right. So that was the fundamental introduction to what machine learning is. And now, considering we'll be working on a hands-on session and trying to build a convolutional neural network model from the ground up, we need to understand certain concepts that are involved in it. And one very important concept is logistic regression, which is basically a classification algorithm. And this is what acts as the decision-making layer of our machine learning model, which will be explained by Tushar.
Yeah. Logistic regression is a classification algorithm. It's used to assign observations to discrete set of classes. Types of logistic regressions include binary, multi, and ordinal. What binary means is observation need to be classified into either one or like two different classes. Observations here means like images or any other sort of data. It has to be classified into two different classes. That's what is binary. And multi is something which we want to classify our observations into more than two classes. That's multi. And what is ordinal is something which we want to classify our observation into some range of what values. Like if I want to say observation is a very poor or very good or average, that's what is ordinal classification. Next. Uh, Next. Hello. Next slide.
Yeah, bro. Okay.
Okay. Fine. What we do in this logistic regression is we feed in some of the parameters to a particular function which outputs some value based on which I will be classifying it to some different classes. So what are the parameters, input parameters which are given to these functions is like x1, x2, x3 is the input feature vectors which we are inputting to our function, and theta1, theta2, and theta3 are the weights associated with that input features. And the output, based on the output which I get after from this function, based on that we should be classifying it to different classes. Here it's shown as happy or sad based on some output values. Okay, next.
So, what sort of classifier is this?
It's a binary classification. Here it's a binary classification.
So yeah,
happy or sad.
Yeah, correct.
And okay, why logistic regression? It's used because having a categorical outcome variable violates the assumption of linearity in normal regression. In normal regression, we get some values which are greater than 1 and less than 0. Like its range is ranging from minus infinity to plus infinity. So I won't be able to classify into different classes. So in order to make it easier, what we do is take that linear function and feed it to a function in logistic regression. It can be either a sigmoid function or a tanh function, which will be explained later in activation functions. And what it outputs is it outputs in a particular range based on which I can classify it into different classes. For example, a model to predict whether an email is a spam or not. What we do is we feed in the parameters to that function, and it outputs from if it's a sigmoid function, it outputs in the range of 0 to 1. And if the value is closer to 1, I classify it as a spam, or if it's closer to 0, I say it's not a spam. So that's what linear regression can't do, because its range is infinite number of values is present in that range, and so I won't be able to classify. So that's why we use logistic regression for classification. And further, in our hands-on session we will be using something called as softmax function. Its working is similar to this logistic regression sigmoid function. We'll be dealing with that later. And the formula for this sigmoid function is given over there. Sigma of z is equal to 1 plus 1 by 1 plus e power minus z. Here z is the linear function, weight times the input feature vector plus bias, which is fed into this function, and the R will be getting output which is in the range of 0 to 1. Okay, next. So this is the formula which I said in the previous slide, and here theta naught is the bias, or what we call it as a bias, and theta 1, theta 2, and so on are the weights associated with those features x1, x2, and x3, and so on. Okay, this is the formula, and for sigmoid function, this will be explained further in the activation functions session. Next slide. Okay, decision boundary. The based on the output which I get in that function, whatever sigmoid function or whatever, I should be classifying into different classes. So how we need to choose some threshold value above which or below which we classify into different classes. Here, if we choose the threshold value to be 0.5, if I get a output from that function, like for example, if I get 0.8 as an output, since it's greater than 0.5, I'll be classifying it as a class 1. And for another example, if I get output from that function to be 0.2, since it's lesser than 0.5, I'll be classifying it as class 0. So that's what is decision boundary. Next one. Okay, coming to cost function. Cost function is a measure of how wrong our model is in terms of its ability to establish relationship between x and y. What it means is our model outputs some value, like it may be true or may not be true. So how wrong our model is, how wrong it has predicted. So whatever h theta of x you see over there is nothing but the a prediction by our model, and which is usually denoted by y hat, and so this cost function says how much wrong our model has predicted. So if at all the ground truth, that is y is 1, and the y level is 1, and our model has predicted it as 1, which is correct. If it has predicted it correctly, h theta of x should be 1, and which is equal to y. So what happens is minus log of 1 is 0. So our cost function value is 0, which means our model has predicted correctly as 1, label 1. And similarly, if the ground truth is 0, and if our model predicts it's to be 0, what happens is h theta of x in the second line which you see there becomes 0. So minus log of 1 minus 0 is again 0, which means our model has predicted it correctly as class 0. So, and our whole aim of designing this model is to minimize that cost function. Our model should be able to predict the observation properly. So what we should do is minimize that cost function. So what we do is something called as gradient descent. It's an optimization algorithm for minimizing that cost function. I'll be using Jamboard for that for clear understanding. I'm in slide 1. Right. So our cost function is, let me take j, denote cost function by j, and it's on z axis, and it's a function of weights and biases. So it's a paraboloid, and initially what we do is we set weights and bias to some random values. So our cost function value can be somewhere over here. So now what I should do is I should update the values of weights and biases in such a way that after some number of iterations, I should be coming to this minimum value of the cost function, or somewhere closer to that. So what I do is something called as gradient descent. So by which we update the values of weights and biases in each iteration. So after first iteration, after updating weights and bias value, I might reach over here, and after another iteration, I reach over here, and after some number of iterations, I reach somewhere closer to this, hence minimizing the value of cost functions. And these steps, whatever we did, is nothing but called as gradient descent, updating the values of these weights and bias. And by how much should I come down? That is nothing but something called as learning parameter, learning rate alpha. We should be choosing this alpha in a proper manner. If I choose this to be a very high value, what happens is, just from here I can jump to this, and after first iteration, and after a second iteration I might jump back to this. In a way, I won't be able to reach this global minimum after any number of iterations. So it shouldn't be too high also. And if it's too low, what happens is I'll be performing gradient descent so many times, such our model learns very slowly. So this is called as an hyperparameter. So we should be able to choose this value very wisely in order to perform this gradient descent in an effective manner. So that's what is gradient descent. Come back to slides. And since we do this gradient descent multiple number of times, if you are familiar with coding in TensorFlow, you might have said something like number of epochs to some value. That is nothing but number of times we perform this gradient descent, in order to get optimized value for this particular loss function, cost function. And now activation functions, which will be continued by Paul.
Yeah, hi. So activation functions. Activation functions, as Shashank had said earlier, a CNN has a lot of layers. So what an activation function does is, as the definition states, an activation function in a neural network defines how the weighted sum of the input is transformed into an output from a node or nodes in a layer of the network. So what an activation function does is it defines the data between the nodes. It takes the input, works on the input, and as the output sends it to the next layer, or in some cases it gives you the output itself. And next slide. So CNNs are mainly used for image processing, and it identifies the features of an image, and images have a lot of non-linear structures in it, like curves and edges, which you can't identify them through the normal linear functions, because these patterns are it's non-linear in nature. So if you don't have an activation function, you're not going to be able to identify these patterns. So that's the main need for activation functions. So I'm going to be talking about a few activation functions that are in general used in CNNs. So the first one's the rectifier function. It's a very basic function. It's linear in nature, but if you go in detail, it's more of the max of 0 or the value itself. So any negative part that the function gets is going to be scaled up to 0, and the rest of the function stays as it is. Now, when this function is attached to a linear unit, it's called the ReLU function, which is one of the most commonly used activation functions in CNN. And this function is a little different. It's the max of 0, w into x plus b, where w and b are the weights and the bias respectively. And the weights and the bias, it's set according to us, depending on the feature that it has to get. And yeah, so this is a basic ReLU function, but there are other functions. So the next function is a sigmoid function. This is another commonly used activation function. And what this function does is it scales the value between 0 and 1. So no matter what the value is, it's going to scale it down between 0 and 1. And suppose the value you get is 0, then it's going to be, the sigmoid function is going to return a value of around 0.5. And the positive values would be scaled between 0.5 and 1. And the negative values between 0 and 0.5. Now, one problem we face in the sigmoid function, it's called the vanishing gradient problem. So the reason is, in a case where there are a lot of layers, the sigmoid function keeps compressing these values. And as you will learn later on, there's a process called backward propagation, which is very essential for a model to learn. And because of the constant compression of these values, there are chances that sometimes you're going to get a continuous string of zeros, which is not good for your model. So there is an upscaled version of the sigmoid function called the hyperbolic tan function. Now this function, instead of 0 to 1, it's going to scale it between -1 to 1. It gives you a steeper, I mean, it gives you a better gradient, basically. Yeah, it gives you a wider range. So you're not going to face, I mean, this hyperbolic tan function also has the vanishing gradient problem, but it's not as bad as the sigmoid function. It's a little better. And yeah, so the last function I'm going to be talking about is the softmax activation function. This function is usually used in the output layers. So as the definition states, softmax is an activation function that scales numbers or logits into probabilities. The output of a softmax is a vector with probabilities of each possible outcome. The probabilities in vector V sums to 1 for all possible outcomes or classes. So usually this function is usually used in output in the output layers because it's going to give you a range of probabilities. So it's going to be values between 0 and 1, and if you sum up these values for each of the neurons, it's going to sum up to 1. So that's how probability works, right? So the neuron with the highest probability is this is the neuron I'm going to choose to activate because it gives me a better probability. Suppose I have 3 output neurons and each of them give me a score of 0.7, 0.2, and 0.1. Then I'm gonna prefer the one with 0.7 because it has a higher score, and this function it gives you a better understanding as to which one you have to choose and which one you don't have to choose at all. And this is the formula for the softmax function where these are the variables. Y is the input vector, yi is the ith element of the input vector, and we use the exponential function of yi, and n is the number of classes or the possible outcomes. And yeah, so that's the softmax function, and there are a lot of activation functions. You can choose from any of them. It solely depends on your model. Like, so the function that gives you the most optimal outcome, you choose that function. I mean, there's no perfect function, but yeah, each of them has their own purpose, and you choose the function that helps you the most. Yeah. And now Shashank is going to take over with CNNs.
All right, thanks, Paul. So yeah, before we get into convolutional neural networks itself, let's talk a little bit about what a machine learning usually has, what a machine learning model usually has. So there are multiple layers, as I told earlier, and initially the layer goes from, the data transfers from the input layer to the hidden layer and then to the output layer. So this is a top-down approach wherein you're entering the first layer, going to the processing layer, and then to the output layer, which in the technical term, this is called as forward propagation. And to complete the model, we have another, the other approach which starts from the output layer by taking the output, and then it basically goes on to check how wrong our model has been. So this is called a backward propagation, wherein it starts its journey from the output layer, goes all the way to the hidden layer, and then goes back to the input layer. So this one cycle is basically what constitutes a machine learning model. Though the output is provided by the forward propagation layer, it's the backward propagation layer that it's a backward propagation step that actually makes a model more efficient and enables the model to understand where it's losing out and adjust its weights and biases, so on. So weights and biases are basically certain values that you put in between the synapses so that your data can be modified accordingly. Right. So yeah, let's dive right into convolutional neural networks now. And the first layer of convolutional neural network is convolutions. So convolutions are basically a mathematical operation that's performed on matrices, right? So we need to understand that when images fed into a computer system are fed as a matrix of numbers. So suppose we have an image that has 720 pixels by 720 pixels, 720 in the height and 720 in the width. Each of those pixel constitutes one cell in a 7 matrix. And considering we will be sticking to a two-dimensional convolutional neural network, we can only process black and white images. And black and white images can have a value from 0 to 225, where 0 is black and 225 is white, or depending on the convention that you choose. So you have certain values for each of those cells, and that the image is represented to you as a matrix. So yeah, let's understand what convolutions are. So I'll just go to the Jamboard so that you can try and understand the operation a little better. Slide number 2. Cool. So suppose this is this 6x6 matrix is something that's fed into us as an image, and this 3x3 is something that we'll apply as a filter, which acts as a way to extract out the features that we need. So this particular filter that I have applied can enable me to choose out the dominant vertical edges. So what I'll do is I'll basically take one small patch of this entire image and convolve it with the filter matrix. So what convolution basically is I'll take the first element of this particular patch that I've chosen, and I'll multiply it with the first element of the filter, take the second element, multiply it with the second element, take the third element, multiply it with the third element of the filter, so on. And I'll sum up the entire, I'll sum up all the products that I've received through multiplying the patch and the filter. And whatever result I get, I'll store it in another matrix, which in technical terms is called as a feature map, which we'll get into eventually. So what this gives me is, a filtered out data from the image, which has only the features that I'm looking for. Right. Back to the slides. So considering we have a fundamental understanding or a fundamental intuition of what convolutions are, let's understand what a filter is. So filters are something that enables you to extract out features from the given image to you. So initially filters were something that were designed by hand, and it was something that was very specific to an image that you needed to choose. Suppose you wanted to detect pointy edges, you had to design your own filter to detect pointy edges, but it's changed now and we have a lot of filter that's available. We can customize our own filters. There are multiple applications that gives you filters that you need. So when you look at a filter like this is called, the two of these are called Sobel filters. One helps in detecting the vertical edges and the other helps in detecting the horizontal edges. And we have another website that can give you a better intuition of how filters work. So if you could go to the particular website. Yep. Right. Let's go all the way down. Yeah, over here. So suppose we choose a Sobel filter. This is the input image, by the way. And if we choose the Sobel filter, this is the so you can see that all the vertical dominant edges that you saw in the input image are now highlighted, and the other things are just blackened out. So through this, I'll be able to classify images classify the dominant vertical edges in this particular image. So if you can go back to the original image once again, I think it'll give you a slight better. Yeah. So as you can see, there are certain edges like the pillars, the carving through the pillars, all of those, the fancy grooves on the the minarets. And if you go back to the filter now, you can see those are the things that are highlighted, right? And you can do the same thing to try and filter out the vertical dominant edges by basically applying the transfers of the earlier filter that we had, right? So yeah, I'm assuming you guys got the basic intuition of filters are, right? All right, I'll take it for an S, and I think we can move forward. Right. Okay, so as I explained earlier, filter is something that basically performs convolution. You're taking it as the second matrix to perform convolution through your source image. And here's another thing we need to understand. So since the input image is divided into multiple patches, we need to transgress it, by skipping one cell or two cell or so on. And this number of cells through which we transgress, or through the number of cells that we skip through every convolution process is called as strides. So if we have one stride, we are basically going to shift the given image patch by one cell. If the strides are two, we'll shift the image patch by two cells, so on and so forth. Right. Okay. So why is that the filter is smaller than the image source? As I told earlier, filter is something that's applied on an image to extract out features, and certain features that we are looking for in an image can be in any part of the image. So suppose we are looking for something like zebra crossing on a road, right? So to detect those dominant, let's say vertical or horizontal edges that the zebra crossing comprises of, we need to transfer this entire filter layer that we have throughout the image, and that is what gives us so in that way we'll be able to extract out the feature that we need throughout the image. And this in technical term is called translation invariance, but the whole intuition of choosing a smaller filter over a larger image source is so that we'll be able to apply that particular filter throughout the image, through every nook and corner, and so that we can extract out the features from any part of the image. Right. So this is basically how convolution works. So as you can see, it starts out with the first image patch has a stride of 2, goes to the next image patch, the other image patch, so on and so forth. Right. So what are feature maps? Feature maps, in all practicality, is the output that you receive when you convolve a source image with another filter layer. So feature maps basically contains multiple scalar values that are stacked on top of each other. And each scalar value comes from convolving one image patch with another with the given filter matrix. So these feature maps contain the essential features that we are looking for in the image, and it's basically the most probable feature that matches with the feature that you are requesting for. Through your filter layer. That's exactly what the scalar value represents. Right. So yeah, here's another example of how scalar values are stacked on top of each other to give us a feature map. All right. So as I told earlier, the initial process is only for a black and white image. But if we need to choose multiple colors, I mean, if you need to perform the same operations on colored images, we need to bring in multiple channels of the filters, and which will be further explained by Dhruval.
So am I audible?
Yeah, you are. Go ahead.
Okay. So color images have multiple channels, typically one for each color, such as red, green, and blue. This means that a single image provided as input to the model is in fact 3 matrices. Hence, a filter must always have the same number of channels as the input, often referred to as depth. This means that if a convolution layer has 32 filters, these 32 filters are also 3-dimensional, having specific filter weights for each of the 3 channels. So this is how the convolution operation occurs in case of 3D filters, which is also known as convolution of volumes. So you can see that the input image is divided into 3 different matrices, red, green, and blue, and each of these channels have their own filter matrices. You perform the convolution of these matrices separately and then add their convolved output to obtain 1 pixel in the output feature map. Convolution layers are not only applied to input data, but they can also be applied to the output of other layers as well. So the dimensionality increases as and when we have multiple convolution layers with multiple filters. So here we can see a 2D black and white image being converted into a volume by applying a convolution with multiple filters. The filters that operate on the output of the first few layers may extract combinations of low-level features such as lines, curves, and various other basic features. This process continues until very deep layers are extracting faces, animals, etc. This is exactly what we see in practice, the abstraction of features to high and higher orders as the depth of the network increases. Now, while applying convolutional filters, we need to understand some basic terminology. Strides is one of them. Strides decide the number of places by which our filter should move over the input. For example, here if the stride is 2, then the filter would move by 2 places each time. So you can see that the first application of the filter is over this patch of the image shown in a red box. And as the stride is 2, the next application has a displacement of 2 pixels from the earlier application. So this is how the strides work. Another term we need to be clear about is padding. The edge pixels in the input matrix are less used when compared to the pixels present inside the matrix. So their contribution is less to form the output. In order to make them equal, we use padding. In padding, we add extra rows or columns of zeros at the edges of the input matrix. So here you can see that the input matrix has been padded with one layer of zeros surrounding it. So here the padding is 1. So by doing this, we increase the importance of the edge pixels as well. Okay, so once a convolution layer is applied, it is common to use a pooling layer. The pooling concept is used when we have to reduce the input size without losing its important features. We use pooling when we want to reduce the parameters in our network. What basically happens is that we take groups of pixels from the image and perform an aggregation over them. There are prominently 2 types of aggregations used: max pooling and average pooling. In case of max pooling, the maximum element is selected from within a window and is given as the output. In case of average pooling, the average value of all the pixels within a window is the output. So here you can see that if this is the input and we have a 2x2 max pooling filter with strides 2, what this does is this filter is placed over this image patch, and within this image patch the maximum value is chosen as the output. So we can see that the filter is placed here first, so it chooses the maximum value there, and with strides of 2 it moves to this. So from this patch the maximum value is selected, and so forth, so on, to give the output feature map. So yeah.
Okay, so that was pretty much it about the explanation part, and I think we can dive into the hands-on session now. So yeah, before we get into the hands-on session, instead of making all of this fancy terms sound like, you know, alien stuff, what convolution basically does, I mean, coupled with max pooling, is convolution is basically extra features that you need from an image, and through max pooling you're only going to take the most dominant part of the feature that you're that you have requested for through the filter layer. So convolutions basically filters out the necessary features, and the max pool layer is only picking out the dominant features from the filtered out features. So that's really what you know, a convolution layer coupled with the max pooling layer is doing. Right. So I think we can go ahead to the hands-on session. So yeah, guys, if I need you guys to go to your browser and type Google Colab. So, and you can click on the very first link that you can see on the web page, and that will lead you to a box, and you can just click on GitHub over there. So you guys must have received a link on the chat. So if you can just copy that link and paste it on this particular pop box that you can see, it will directly lead you to the code that we guys have written down. So due to lack of time, we won't be able to code the entire program from scratch. So what we have done is we have coded down the entire program already, and we'll be explaining almost line by line whatever we have done, so that all of you can have a better intuition as to what's happening.
So guys, give a thumbs up if you are able to open the Google Colab.
I mean, you guys can give a thumbs up, or you can just unmute yourselves and talk. It's not really a formal session, so you guys can feel free in being yourselves.
Okay. So if you have any doubts as well, you can ask us. Okay, so yeah, let's go on to the code part then. So once you open this, you can click on runtime and then press run all, so that all the cells run. So in this cell, what is happening is we are importing the basic libraries, and we'll be using NumPy for coding the CNN.
So before we go ahead, has everyone gone to the hands-on part? Like, is everyone comfortable with the Google Colab part? All right, I think we can take it for an S.
Yeah.
All right.
So yeah, we'll be using NumPy for the code and Matplotlib for plotting and for visualization of what is happening in each layer. And we are using TensorFlow for loading the MNIST dataset. So this is how the MNIST dataset looks like. It is a set of handwritten digits. Each image is of size 28 by 28, and it's a black and white image. So it has a single channel. And there are 60,000 images in the training set and 10,000 images in the testing set. So yeah, this is the first layer in our model known as the convolution layer, and this class will be explained by Shashank.
All right. So as I told earlier, convolution layer is the layer which helps you in extracting out the necessary features that you need. So as I told earlier, the output you receive from the convolution layer is called the feature map. And the feature map is a matrix that is smaller than the initial input, containing only the necessary features that you want from the image. So the size of the feature map is given by I minus f plus 2p divided by s plus 1. So I is basically the size of the input image, f is the size of the filter, and twice p is basically the size of the padding that you're giving. So suppose you give one layer of padding, it basically encircles your entire image with one layer of zeros. So that's increasing your column size by 2 and increasing your row size by 2, and that's the reason you go with plus 2p. So S is basically the number of strides you're taking, and that's basically the number of cells you want to skip while transgressing through your image. And you're adding 1 just to make up the size of the the size of the feature array. Right. Okay, so this is the convolution layer that we'll be using. As you can see, it's a 2-dimensional convolution which works only for black and white images or non-colored images. Okay, so the line number 3 that you can see is basically us trying to establish the shape of the feature map or the shape of the output we'll be getting from the convolution layer. So it's the exact same formula, and we are just defining the size of both the columns and the number of rows. Right. So here we'll be declaring we'll be initializing the hyperparameters from required for our particular class. So it's the number of filters, it's the size of the filters that we'll be using, the strides we'll be using, and the padding extent to which we need to pad the image. Okay. Right. So line number 12, as you guys can see, that's highlighted. This is where we'll be establishing our filters. So in the first run, we'll go with random filters, and let me go back to the JAM board here so that I can explain the basic architecture of filters a little better. I'm on slide 3 through it. Cool. So filters can basically be multiple in numbers, and so let's assume we have 3 different filters, right? So the number of filters is definitely 3. And we have 2 other parameters for each of these filters. One is the height of the filter, and the other is the width of the filter. So these 3 are stored as an array, and the first element is going to be the number of filters that we'll be using. The second element is going to be the height of the filters that we'll be using, and third element is going to be the width of the filter that we'll be using. And when you look back at the code, yeah, that is exactly what we're doing in line number 12. If you can just go to the code through. So line number 12, that's exactly what we are doing. We have a size that's giving us the number of filters that we have, the size, the height of each of these filters, and the width of each of these filters. So we are filling that with random numbers for the initial run. Now the next function that we have over here is basically us trying to divide the entire picture into smaller image patches. so that we can perform convolution through convolution with these patches and the filter layer that we applied before. So as I told earlier, the image patches are of the same size of that of the filter. So we will run two for loops, one to access the rows and the other to access the columns. And we will be basically generating different patches of the image, each of them being the size of the filter. So, and yeah, each of them being the size of the filter, and we will be segregating one large image into much smaller components so that the filter can work on its feature extraction portion, right? Okay, so the next function that you guys can see over here is the padding function. So as Dhruval explained earlier, padding is something that you perform when you need to consider the entirety of the image. What usually happens in convolution is because it's a convolutional operation that's happening, we might end up losing the information that's present on the edges of the image, that is the outermost layer of the image. So in order to negate that loss, we basically fill the image with the multiple layers of zeros so that while you're performing the convolution, you will be able to extract out features from the edges of the original image that was provided to you guys. And it's also done in a way wherein you need to keep the feature map size the same as that of the initial image. So as we know that feature maps are usually a smaller matrix when compared to the source image. In order to negate this property of feature maps, we basically pad the entire image with multiple zeros, so that we can end up getting a feature map that's the same size of the source image that was given to us. So that's what's happening over here. Based on the padding size that we have given in the hyperparameters earlier, the function basically surrounds the image matrix with that many layers of zeros. And as I told earlier, the size of the image, the column size and the row size of the image increases by twice the size of the padding. So that's exactly what's happening over here. The output shape that you can see, line number 22. So this is what's giving us the size of the padded image, basically. Cool. So that was basically, processing the image before it can get into the actual propagation of the machine learning model. So this is where the entire journey of the model starts. This is the forward propagation of the first layer. So forward propagation in the convolution layer is simply by performing the convolution operation on the source image. So what you get over here is basically one scalar output per image patch. And if you can see the second if you can see line number 33 to 35, this is exactly what's performing convolution. So what's basically happening is you take a particular image patch, you convolve it with the filter layer, and what Access basically does is we need to understand that NumPy has a property wherein when you perform a summation operation on a given matrix. Okay, let me just go to the Jamboard so that I can explain it better. Yeah. So suppose you got an image over here, right? Cool. So suppose you perform, let's say, summation of all its rows, or summation of all its rows. What basically happens is it's collapsing all the rows to just one cell. So all that you have is the resultant of all of the rows over here. And when you perform summation through its through the height of the matrix, it reduces into 1 cross 1 matrix, which has one single value. And this contains the sum of all the rows and all the columns. So this, in technical terms, is called collapsing, which is kind of a characteristic for NumPy operations such as summation and multiplication and so on. Right. So what you're getting over here is basically one scalar value, which is stacked on top of each other and stacked beside each other to give us the final feature map, which acts as the output of the convolution layer, and it also acts as the input to the next layer, which is the max pooling layer or the pooling layer. And okay, so this is the back propagation portion. So as I told earlier, forward propagation is a top-down approach wherein it starts from the first layer, goes all the way to the last layer. Now back propagation is something that starts from the last layer, comes all the way up to the first layer. So I think this will give us a better intuition if we look at the backward propagation of the other layers first, but I'd like to give you a basic intuition So backward propagation is to try and rectify the error as much as possible. So the cost function has to be 0 so that, or at least the maximum minimum, or at least the minimum value that's attainable. So that's exactly what back propagation does. And to give a basic, let's say, an intuition of the back propagation of a convolution layer is when you take the output from, let's say, the max pooling layer, and when you multiply it with the original image patch that you have extracted out from the convolution layer, you should get back the original image patch of the source image that's fed into the convolution layer. So that's the idea behind the back propagation of convolutions. And I think it'll give you guys a better picture if you can look at the entire cycle once. So I think we can move forward to the next layer, which is the max pooling layer.
So the main function of the max pooling layer is to reduce the dimension of the input, and it only forwards the most prominent parts of the input to the next layer, that is the pixels with the highest value. As some data is lost in this process, it is always better to use a max pooling layer with a small filter size. This layer does not have any trainable parameters. And once again, the size of the output is calculated by this formula, which was discussed earlier. So this is the max pooling layer class. And we can see that we set the output shape using this formula. And we set the hyperparameters of this layer, which include the filter size, the stride, and the padding. And since this layer does not have any trainable parameters, we can ignore that. This is the image patch generator, which is exactly the same as what was discussed in the convolution layer, with only the difference being it extracts patches from a 3D matrix. This is the padding function, which is also the same as before, but pads 3D matrices. The reason being the input to this layer is from the convolution layer, and since we'll have multiple filters in the convolution layer, the output would be a stack of matrices like this. So we need to extract patches from this. So that's why these two functions have a slight change. So this is the forward propagation layer, wherein we set the output using the shape, this shape, and then we iterate through the image patch, and we find the maximum element in each patch to form one pixel in the output feature map. So once again, we use the numpy's axis, where in order to collapse the input into a single scalar output. We'll again come back to this backward propagation later, and let us move on to the softmax layer. So Tushar.
Yeah, this softmax function is a function that turns a vector of k real values into a vector of k real values that sum up to be 1. And in our model, it's a 3-layered neural network, and the third layer is where we are using our softmax function. And this softmax function is just a simple extension. It's just like a sigmoid function, but here it's used for multi-class classification, whereas sigmoid function was used for binary classification. And the formula for the same is given over there. Sigma of z, vector z is equal to e power zi by summation of j is equal to 1 to k e power zj. So here k is a number of classes which we want to classify our observation into, and in our model it's k is 10 because we want to classify our observations into 10 different classes. So coming to the code part, okay, here we initially we set the weights and biases to some random values, and what is fed into this function is that output from the previous layer. Our previous layer was our max pool layer. Whatever it outputs, it is fed as input for this particular softmax layer, and then we call this forward propagation function, no, which has got this which applies our softmax function. And here the image modified, what you see over there is called image dot flatten. What it does is the output from the previous layer, that is our max pool layer, it outputs some m cross n matrix. And what this function, what flatten does is it converts the m cross and n matrix to m into n cross 1 matrix, and that is a column vector, and that is what it holds. And what output underscore val
Before that, so like this is how it would work. The output from the max pooling layer will also be a multi-dimensional array, and what that flatten will do is it will convert this into a single column vector. I mean, it just flattens all these values into one array.
One column. Okay. Then okay, what output value is nothing but that z we saw earlier, z is equal to w transpose x plus b. That's what weight times the input feature vector plus bias. That's what it holds. And what those line number 13 and 14 does is just outputting whatever this softmax function does. The formula which saw above, that's what it's returning. And we'll come to back propagation in a few minutes. Further it will be continued by Dhruval.
So here we see an example of what our model would output before it is trained. So we have instantiated the 3 layers, and then we do the forward propagation for each layer, and this is the visualization of the output in each step. You can see that the output of the first layer is smaller than the image size, which was 28 by 28, and now it is way smaller than that. And when we apply a max pooling layer, it is reduced even further. So here we are defining the model to be trained, and these are wrapper functions for training the model. This function only does the forward propagation and prints out the output, the cross entropy loss, and the accuracy. And this is the training function, which does both forward propagation, calculates the gradient, and also does the backward propagation. Now, when I talk about this cross entropy loss, it is defined as negative log of the output. And hence, if you take the differential of that with respect to the output, you get the gradient, which is defined as -1 by output, and that is what is sent as input to the softmax layers back propagation. So let us go back to the softmax layers back propagation now.
Okay. So what? So since this is our softmax function is our function in the last layer, we start back propagation from that layer itself. So what we do is the input parameters for this is dl by dout, which is the what gradient and learning rate, the alpha which we saw earlier. And for I comma grad in enumerate of that gradient, what we do is if that grad value is 0, we skip that iteration, and if it's not 0, we come back to that, come down to the remaining code. And what transformation equation holds is the whatever numerator part we saw in the softmax function e power zi, that's what it holds. And s total is holding the denominator part, the summation of all those e zi values, where e power zj, where j is running from 1 to number of classes. Okay, so that's what it holds. And dy by dz is the differentiation of equation of that our softmax function with respect to z. And two cases arises here. Whenever I is equal to j, we get one differentiated equation, and when I is not equal to j, we get another equation. That's what we are doing. That second line over there, d and dy by dz of I is nothing but whenever I is equal to j, and another equation is when I is not equal to j. Those are the two equations, which we'll be using that later for our calculating dl by dw. And similarly, those gradients dz by dw, dz by db are calculated, and those will be used for the chain rule for calculating dl by dw and dl by db. And after calculate that, those are the gradients. Where we saw that earlier weight has to be updated. So weight is equal to weight minus
Tushar, are you there? Hello?
Okay, I think he got dropped off from the call. I think I'll just continue. I'll just take over from where Tushar left.
Yeah, go ahead, go ahead.
Okay, so just to reiterate it, right. So we'll be taking two differential formations of the entire backward propagation that we are receiving. So the input to the backward propagation is going to be the gradient value that we calculated in the function that Dhruval showed earlier. So we can have basically two values. One is when the output is the same as that of the input, and one is when the output is not the same as that of the input. That is basically I is equal to j and I is not equal to j. So
Okay,
the equation on the line number 25. Okay, I think
It's okay. Shashank is continuing. Continue, Shashank.
Go ahead. Okay, so the equation that you can see on line number 25 is basically when the output is not equal to that of the input, or when I is not equal to j, and the next line is basically the equation that you can use when I is equal to j. Okay, so now these are the other parameters that we're going to be using, to in some of the other functions, like while when we are calculating the loss against the weights and the biases and the inputs. So, right, the biases and the weights that we have initially assumed were random values, so we can just take it as the exact same values, and biases can be equal to 1. And this is where we can actually calculate the loss against the total. So L is taken as a total, and Z is basically the output from the previous layer. So dL by dz is going to be calculated as gradient value into dy by dz. So, right. Okay, so these are the other values that we can calculate through the laws of the weights, biases, and the inputs, which are basically, weights and biases are basically values that are used to manipulate the input, and we are trying to rectify these values over here so that the output that we can get while manipulating it can end up making the error be as low as possible. So post that, we will adjust the weights and the biases that we need to try and keep the errors as low as possible. So what's basically happening in let's say line number 37 to 39 is basically we are performing gradient descent throughout all of these values, and we're basically establishing the gradients for all these values. And in line number 42 and 43, we will be performing gradient descent for all of these values. That's basically the value minus the learning rate into the gradient value. So that's exactly what's happening over here. If you can look at self.weight is equal to self.weight minus learning rate into dl by dw or dl by dv. So we are performing gradient descent until we reach the global minima over here. And what basically happens is we have now reached weights and biases that can be performed, that can be applied to the input layer, or the input layer to the softmax layer, which is basically the output of the previous layer. So we can apply these weights and biases to the input so that we can achieve the output that we desire to have. So the output from this backward propagation layer, or the output from the softmax backward propagation layer, is going to be the input to the the max pool backward propagation layer, which will be explained by Dhruv.
So here we'll be reshaping this input to its original shape, as we are originally flattening it over here. And after reshaping it, we give it to the max pooling layer. So here the backward propagation of the max pooling layer is defined. So what we do is we initialize this layer's gradient to zeros first, and then we again iterate through the patches of the input matrix, and there we again calculate the maximum value for each patch, and again iterating through the image. If that patch, if that particular pixel is the maximum value, we give the differential back to the previous layer. Otherwise, it will be 0. This is because only certain filters are contributing to this particular output, and hence only those filter weights have to be changed. Hence only those pixels in the gradient we give to the previous layer will have a non-zero value. So now that we have calculated the gradient from the max pooling layer, we give it to the convolutional layer, and Shashank will go about it.
Okay, as I told earlier, the whole idea is for a convolution layer, the error is minimum when you can have when the product between the single image patch that you have extracted out and the output you receive from the previous layer lead up to the patch from the original image. So that's the whole idea about this, and we basically try and okay. So line number 46 is basically what's establishing the gradient that we look for. So dl by df is what acts as a gradient over here, or this should be the most desirable value that we can have when we multiply a given image patch with the output from the max pool layer. So it should technically be leading it to that particular patch from the input source that we have acquired. And again, in line number 49, we will be performing gradient descent so that we can extract out the global minima and establish this to be the most apt value that we can have for the weights and the or for the convolution filter that we'll be applying to the image source. Right, that's pretty much about it with the code.
The backward propagation as well. So let us move on to the other parts of the code. So here, as I told, these are all wrapper functions for predicting and showing the inner workings and all. And this is the training function. So we iterate through the data set multiple times, and that is defined by this epochs term over here. And in each iteration of the epoch, we can see that the accuracy is improving and the loss is reducing, exactly what we were what we desire. And we can then plot out how the training has gone, and we can see that we can see the same thing, like the loss is decreasing and the accuracy is improving. And we can also see the testing accuracy, the part of the data which the model hadn't already seen, and how it fares there. And we see that we get about 82% accuracy. And here we can see some predictions of the unseen images, and we can see that the model is predicting that this is a 2. So you can play around with this model over here, and with different hyperparameters, we'll get different accuracies. So any doubts?
Yeah, I think that's about it. Thanks a lot for sticking around and taking a day off from your Sunday to attend this workshop. And you guys can ask any questions related to chords or team or what we do if you guys are interested in the same.
So you can post your messages on the Discord server as well, and we'll be answering there. So thanks for attending, and see you the next time.
Yeah, thank you.